Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Macro Sutra. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, and of course we're going to be talking about the elections. Now you know that this show is not about politics, so we aren't going to go into the political implications, but we are going to talk about the economic implications and what the economic priorities are going to be for the new government. To discuss all of this, we have with us Radhika Pandey, Associate Professor at NIPFP. Thank you, Radhika, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharad.
So now, Radhika, let's first talk about what is the economy, the state of the economy that this new government will inherit.
Right. So if you look at the recently released GDP numbers, the numbers came out last week, and we have the GDP number for the full financial year. And they show that GDP posted a growth of 8.2%. Right. And even if we go by the cleaner measure of growth, which is gross value addition, because GDP did get a boost due to lower subsidies and higher taxes. So even if we exclude those elements and just look at the growth using gross value addition, we see that GVA growth posted, grew by 7.2% in FY24.
Which is also quite robust.
Which is quite decent, robust, given the current challenges. So overall, the economy looks great in terms of growth numbers, the headline growth numbers. Now, when we start looking at the drivers of growth, we've seen that, if we look at the last 2-3 years, we've seen that bank credit has been good. Public capex has been growing strong. Exports of services have been doing well, right. Underpinned by the growth of global capability centers. So these are some of the factors that have driven growth in the last 2-3 years post-COVID. Now, looking ahead, there are a number of challenges that the economy faces. Just looking at the GDP numbers will tell us that. If we look at from the expenditure side, we see that while GDP growth is 8.2%, but that growth is not broad-based, because one of the key pain points has been the low levels of consumption growth.
Right.
And that we've talked about earlier also, that even if we look at the high-frequency indicators which capture the state of consumption, we see that the consumption of mass item goods have not picked up quite well, and there is kind of an uneven growth in consumption.
There's a premiumization also. That's
premiumization. Happening. So high-value goods are growing at a brisk pace, but mass item consumption or the consumption of goods by people at the lower end of income group, that is not picking up at a robust pace. So that is something to look for by the new government. That
right.
is something to examine through policy support. What can be done, what cannot be done, that's the second level question. But if we want to diagnose the key pain points, one is the weak consumption or uneven consumption, and also that is leading to rural distress, because we see that agricultural growth has been weak due to climate change and due to low rainfall, erratic monsoon. So that has resulted in lower agricultural performance, subdued incomes in the rural regions. Some of this will turn for the better, because now we've seen that there's a projection of a normal monsoon. So some of this will pick up, but policy support is definitely needed to have a sustained level of consumption, because that is necessary to boost private investment as well. And so, we need to see that economy fires on all cylinders. So one of the pain point is definitely the low consumption, and that is should be one of the key priorities of the government.
Right. So let's get into that, because from the way I understand it, a lot of the other pain points, they come from consumption. Right. So what can the government do to boost consumption?
Yeah. So typically when consumption is lower, it indicates low demand, and the policy support typically will be in the form of expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. So what we want to do is, generally the policy response would be to cut taxes, to stimulate demand.
We would love that.
We would love that. So now the question is whether we have the fiscal space or the luxury to do that. So if we look at the fiscal deficit, we've seen that government did well on that count as well.
Right.
Revised estimates for FY24 was 5.8% of GDP. Government was able to contain its fiscal deficit at 5.6% of GDP. And one of the key achievements touted of the government has been its pace of fiscal consolidation after the peak that happened during the COVID time. So I think if the government wants to continue on its path of fiscal consolidation and at the same time maintain its thrust on capital expenditure, then the scope for steep cuts in taxes is limited.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yes, but government can choose to do, but what can government certainly do is at least rationalize, have a look at the GST rates, rationalize those, and that will at least considerably ease some level of burden of taxes. So that is something definitely that should be on the agenda of the government, and that will play a key role in boosting consumption. Tax cuts or not, that is policy choice. That will depend on the fiscal space that is available. Government has got fiscal space in the form of the bonanza of the dividend that the government got from RBI. If the government wants to use that for expenditure or for fiscal consolidation, so there are various policy choices.
Right.
But certainly one of the point is to boost consumption, and also consumption can be boosted if government can provide adequate employment opportunities.
That's what I was going to get to. That's the other way that, first of all, of course, you can reduce taxes on the people, but if you get them more jobs and more income, that's another way that you can boost consumption.
Absolutely.
So what are the priorities there? How can they in 5 years boost something like employment?
Yeah. So if we look at the government's own data, we see that one is the low level of labor force participation rate, though it's picked up, but still it is lower. So one element is that the out of the working age population, only 50% of that is in the workforce. So that is labor force participation. Those who are employed there, also quality of jobs is a concern. On the one side, if we look at from broad industry group, we see that roughly 47% of the employed persons are in agriculture. Now we know that and agriculture's contribution is to GVAs around 18%. So there is a mismatch, and if some of those employment can be shifted to more productive jobs in manufacturing and services sector, that would help. So that would again require reforms in the manufacturing sector. Looking at least, within the manufacturing sector, we've seen that again, manufacturing has done well, but there are uneven growth. Some sectors have not performed well, particularly the labor intensive sectors have not performed well, and there is a scope for looking at sector specific issues. For example, textile is one area which has great potential for absorption of labor.
Right.
Particularly providing employment to women workers as well. But if we look at our exports of textiles, ready-made garments, it hasn't picked up well. We are exporting more of yarn, the inputs rather than output.
The actual final product.
Yes. So those are some of the things. They are all interlinked. We want to boost consumption. For that, we want to improve the quality of employment. If we want to improve the quality of employment, then we have to look at the labor-intensive sectors and also MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises, because they are again important sources of employment. So the pain points of MSMEs need to be addressed in the form of timely credit, technical support, skill, and as well as ensuring that they get timely payments. So these are some of the issues. MSME segments can help in boosting employment prospects. And the last but not the least, education and skilling is very important.
Right,
because the main pain point is that educated unemployment is rising. So there is somewhere a skill deficit, and that needs to be addressed by bringing in reforms in the education sector. We need to look at the school curricula, whether it's able to generate skills which are needed for the emerging areas in the economy.
Right.
So that skill gap needs to be built. So there is, it's a multifaceted approach is required to boost employment prospects, and that will be healthy for consumption to pick up.
Right. And now there are, of course, all of these steps, but another way in generating employment, of course, is to encourage the private sector to invest more. If they invest more, especially in these labor intensive areas and in manufacturing in general, they will end up creating jobs.
Absolutely.
What are the, again, priority points that need to be addressed to encourage the private sector to invest?
Yeah, so absolutely, because again, why private investment is not picking up despite the fact that public capex is providing the support is again due to the fact that consumption is not showing a sustained growth. We see some green shoots of recovery in consumption, then again consumption is weak. So to ensure that private investment picks up in a sustained manner, we need to provide support to consumption needs to pick
So
up.
it's cyclical.
It's a cyclical thing.
Right.
So we need to have consumption. If the private entrepreneurs get these signals that consumption demand is robust, there is a durable rebound in consumption, then there will be improvement in the capacity utilization. Because what we've seen is that while capacity utilization has picked up, it's stuck at 74, 75. So it needs to pick up beyond that. And as well as whatever pain points are there with regards to, again, there are some difficult reforms that need to be done. Maybe factor market reforms are needed.
Land and labor.
Land, labor, how much they will be pursued, it's a difficult proposition, but those need to be kept need to be kept in mind, because factor market reforms are crucial for boosting manufacturing as well as for providing a conducive environment for private investment to flourish.
Right. Okay. And so we've more or less talked about the domestic market, about creating demand here, and that will encourage the private sector to invest. But the other area is exports.
Right.
That's one way that we can grow. That's the one way that we can encourage the private sector to invest more. That's one way to generate employment. So in particular, to do with exports, what is needed? What needs to be done?
Yeah, so for exports, we know that, we've looked at exports data, and in the last financial year, our exports contracted due to geopolitical tensions, but we've also talked about what steps can be taken to address the structural deficiencies. And the reform measures are not something that are not known. We need to have a policy towards reduction of tariffs. We need to ensure that there are no ad hoc imposition of duties, arbitrary imposition of trade restrictions. Agri exports is a very promising area, and we did well in FY23, but in FY24, our agri exports came down, mainly
because we
because
kept banning a lot of them.
Yeah, banning. So agricultural exports, horticulture exports, these are important priority areas. And also again, the micro, small and medium enterprises, because they are contributing 40% to exports. So we need to make them an important player in the policy consultations. Maybe there needs to be some association to hear their voice. What are the pain points they are facing, other than, because government has done a lot for MSMEs in terms of providing credit support during COVID. We saw emergency credit line guarantee scheme. What else needs to be done so that they expand in size and they are able to generate employment as well as boost their export prospects? Because what is needed is to give them incentives to not remain small but to expand in size. So all these reform measures and all these policy measures are interlinked somewhere, and they are all also related to factor market reform, imparting greater flexibility to labor, making land acquisition more flexible and easier. That will boost private investment.
So now a lot of these reforms, I mean, it's very easy to solve these if you throw a ton of money at the problem.
Right.
But the thing is that our fiscal consolidation and debt reduction are also priorities that surely the new government is going to have to put front and center. So what is the picture right now, and what do they need to bring it to?
Right. So in terms of fiscal deficit, as we already discussed, we have done well as compared to the revised estimates. And now we need to see in the budget whether the government further reduces its fiscal deficit target for FY25. In the interim budget, we saw that the target was fixed at 5.1%. But more important is the problem of outstanding debt.
Right.
Because if we look at our outstanding debt, general government debt, which includes both central government as well as state government debt, it is above 83% of GDP.
Of GDP,
So
right.
it's quite high, and we've seen that credit rating agencies have made our outlook from stable to positive.
Yeah.
So now to further ensure or to see that there's some rating upgrade, something needs to be done about having a plan of credible reduction in debt.
And the agencies have themselves actually pointed this out as well, saying that debt is the main issue.
Yeah. So while there are the positive point is that most of this debt is internal, most of this debt is long term, so there are no default concerns as such. But what is needed is, we know that debt sustainability is something that needs to be brought into policy discussion, whether debt is sustainable or not. Because if we keep on accumulating debt, then every year a greater proportion of expenditure will have to be allocated towards interest payments.
Right.
And that will squeeze space for productive expenditure, be it capex or be it now social sector expenditure. That could be a priority. So that cannot happen if we are seeing that our debt is continue to rise. So we have to bring down the debt to GDP ratio so that the interest payments as a share of overall expenditure comes down. So what is needed for that is debt to GDP. If we are able to accelerate the pace of GDP growth, that is one thing that can help in bringing down debt to GDP ratio.
Right.
The other is to have a revised debt management strategy, because if we look at our status paper of government debt is now quite outdated. The government needs to come up with a new status paper of government debt, which outlines its debt management strategy in detail, particularly in light of the fact that this month our government bonds will be part of the emerging market bond indices,
Right.
JP Morgan and Bloomberg. So there needs to be a strategy for reduction of debt. There needs to be a glide path as to when we will be able to reduce our debt and by how much amount, because the Finance Commission gave the glide path and now we are nearing the end of that glide path. So we need to have a roadmap for debt reduction.
So now, of course, with a topic like this, we have a lot of questions from the audience. Saurabh asks, or rather, yeah, he asks, agriculture export bans has played a key role in the defeat of BJP in Maharashtra. This is what he says. Should the farm laws be revised state-wise rather than as a nationwide reform measure?
Yeah, so I think before that, the first step is to do extensive stakeholder consultation and to talk to all the stakeholders and to communicate to them the intent of farm laws, what are the pros and what are the cons, so, and then decide whether it has to be implemented statewide or nationwide. Extensive consultation, stakeholder consultation, proper communication of the intent of farm laws is very important. I think that was lacking last time and that led to these revolts. So it's very important to communicate the intent of farm laws, not only in English but also in local languages, so that people
Right.
understand that better. There has to be a campaign for ensuring that farm laws are understood better, the intent, the contours of farm laws are understood better, and then we take it forward from there.
Okay, and now Gautam asks, and we talked about this a little bit, but he says, do you feel that with this mandate, fiscal consolidation would take a back seat and the 4.5% target might seem a little too far-fetched? I think what he means is that will a coalition government make fiscal consolidation more of a challenge?
At this point in time, it doesn't look like that way, because there is a political setback, but it should not translate into economic setback. It is one of the things that has been touted as one of the key achievements of this government, that they have tried to stick to its path of fiscal consolidation and even has done better in terms of its stated path of fiscal consolidation. So I think that government would try to stick to its path of 4.5% of GDP fiscal deficit by FY26, and given that it has done better, it won't be, if it sticks to its path, I think it will be able to achieve, and it doesn't, at this moment, it doesn't seem like a possibility that the government will be deviating from its fiscal consolidation path.
Okay. And here we have a question from somebody who has not named themselves. They've used an anonymous handle. They ask, what will happen to reforms related to industries and MSMEs?
I think they will continue because everybody wants jobs, everybody wants export prospects. I think the policy path would be to focus more on labor intensive industrial segments as well as on MSMEs. MSMEs have always been a priority area for this government, and with the advent of coalition governance also, I think that thrust will continue. Whatever are the pain points of MSMEs, that will continue to be accommodated in the larger policy picture of this government, because that is needed for boosting exports, that is needed for enhancing competitiveness of industry. Sector specific approach is needed, issue by issue understanding what are the pain points in each sector, that is needed. So I think the focus on manufacturing will continue. There could be these PLI schemes could be extended to some more sectors.
Right.
There could be a review of some of the PLI schemes, and that is very much needed. So I think the thrust will continue with the policy measures, and we would like to see what happens in the budget announcement on manufacturing. That will be the first platform to get to see what is the government's policy direction now.
Right. And the thing is that most of these issues are very non-controversial when it comes to, politically non-controversial. Like boosting manufacturing, I don't see anybody say that no, we should.
It's not something like farm laws or land labor factor market reforms, which could be something controversial, but boosting exports or improving the productivity of manufacturing sector, providing policy support or understanding what are the pain points, that is something which should be the thrust of this government, and that thrust should continue.
Right. And now finally we have a question from Anurag. He asks, what will happen to privatization related reforms in this new coalition government, specifically the banking privatization?
I think that has already been on the cold storage. If we talk about this government as well, we saw in the initial year, 2021, there was an entire section devoted in the budget speech on strategic disinvestment, on identifying certain strategic sectors where government will have a minimum stake and the rest will be privatized. We did see some progress, we did see some discussion, but in the latter years, we didn't see much traction happening anyways on this. Focus has shifted towards asset monetization, which also did not do that well, but focus has been on asset monetization rather than on strategic disinvestment, and particularly on public sector disinvestment. What they have done is merged few public sector banks, and now the number of banks have reduced, but beyond that nothing has happened on bank privatization.
In fact, over the last 10 years, the only privatization that's happened is Air India. Otherwise, HPCL was sold to ONGC. So, which is also a PSU. So, as far as privatization goes, the first 10 years have not been that strong. The next 5, it's unlikely that they will go very strong on it.
And given that now public sector banks have been performing well in terms of their NPA reduction and profitability, the discourse or the proposal to even initiate public sector bank privatization will become more challenging.
Right. So there you go. These are broadly 5 categories where the new government has to really focus its attention. One is in boosting household consumption. All of us, we need to start going and buying more things, boosting the economy like that. How this will happen is one of the major ways is through employment generation. You employ people more, you pay them more, they will go out and buy more things. The way to boost employment generation is to encourage the private sector, and so that's the third priority that needs to happen. The fourth is to boost exports. That really needs to happen. We have a lot of potential, but it's still lying untapped. And the fifth, of course, is to reduce the government's debt levels, because those are they aren't quite there yet, but they're reaching concerning levels. And we need to, just control that, bring it down. It'll help with our ratings. It'll help with a lot of things. So these are the 5 areas that the new government should prioritize. But on that note, that's all we have for you. Thank you so much for watching.